"Are you actually paying in coins?" The young server's voice echoed across the room, sharp and loud enough to turn heads. The sound of metal clinking on the marble counter cut through the cozy hum of brunch hour, making it feel like every eye in the diner was now focused on the old man in front of her. He didn't flinch, just continued lining up dimes and nickels one by one, his hands slow but steady, his eyes fixed on the coins, not on the people staring. She scoffed again, louder. "This time, this isn't a vending machine, sir." A few chuckles rose from nearby tables. Still, he didn't react. No anger, no embarrassment, just a quiet resolve. He finished stacking the last few coins, then slid a crumpled receipt next to the small pile and stepped back, gently adjusting the collar of his wool cardigan. "Next," she snapped, waving the next customer forward like she hadn't just humiliated an 81-year-old man in front of a full room. That man's name was Harold Granger. Every Saturday he came to Sunnybrook Café for the same meal, a $6.50 breakfast deal, 2 eggs, toast, and coffee with free refills. He always paid in exact change, not because he liked being difficult, but because he had to. He saved every nickel and dime in a faded tobacco tin labeled breakfast. He had no credit card, no digital wallet, no online account. Just a system that worked for him. A system that kept his world in order. Harold made his way back to his booth, the same one by the window he'd been sitting in for years. Each step felt heavier than usual, as if the room itself had become longer, the path stretched out. He walked past stares and smirks, his cane tapping the tile in rhythm with his breath. He didn't meet their eyes. That was another old habit, something he'd learned in places far from home, in moments far worse than this. His coffee had cooled, steam long gone. His eggs were rubbery. Still, he took his seat and began eating with care. Waste was a luxury Harold couldn't allow, not after living through months in desert war zones where rations came once a day, if at all. He reached into his coat, pulling out a plastic pill organizer. He tucked a small white tablet under his tongue and quietly took a sip of cold coffee. 2 teens across from him whispered, "Why's everyone staring at that guy?" one asked. "Probably thinks the world owes him something," the other replied with a smirk. Harold didn't answer, but his hand gripped the coffee mug a little tighter. That hand had once carried injured soldiers out of fire zones. It had repaired radio wires in freezing wind. Now it shook, not from weakness but from the weight of remembering. At the counter, the waitress laughed with a coworker. "I swear we need a policy about coins," she said, "like bring a card or don't eat out." Another server added, "Maybe he's saving his cash for something more important, like a new pair of shoes." They both laughed. What they didn't know was that Harold's spare dollars went into a savings envelope for his granddaughter's college tuition. It wasn't much, $5 here, 10 there, but it was what he could do on his fixed veteran's pension. After paying for his medications and rent, he didn't have much left. But what he had, he gave. The manager, a middle-aged man in a polo, peeked out from the kitchen but said nothing. He didn't want to get involved. Then, just as Harold stood up to leave, a voice rang out from the back corner of the diner. Calm, firm, impossible to ignore. How much was his meal? The waitress looked around, confused. "What?" I said. "How much did the gentleman's breakfast cost?" The man now walking toward the counter was tall, late 50s, and dressed in a blazer that didn't quite hide the service ribbons on his chest. $6.50? The waitress mumbled, her confidence faltering. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill and placed it gently on the counter. "That covers his meal. And the tips for your entire staff today." The room fell silent. The laughter stopped. Even the cook leaned out the window over the grill, spatula still in hand. "Sir, that's not necessary," the manager said, finally stepping forward. "You're right," the man replied. "It's not, but it's the least I can do." Then he turned to Harold. "Sergeant Granger." Harold's brow furrowed. He hadn't heard that name said like that in decades. "It's me, Colonel Mason Burke. We served together in Kandahar. I was the kid who couldn't hold a rifle straight until you taught me how." The old man blinked, For a second, time melted. That young, trembling recruit was now a decorated officer with silver in his beard. Burke stepped forward and saluted. "You gave me my second chance, Sergeant. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to it." Harold's grip loosened on his cane as recognition and disbelief washed over him. "Colonel Burke," he said, voice cracking. "Yes, sir. And you're still the best damn NCO I ever met." The waitress stood frozen, her face pale. Burke turned to her. "Do you have any idea what it takes for a man to come home from 3 combat deployments, survive loss, and still walk into a place like this with his head up?" She shook her head slightly. "Respect," Burke said. "And today you robbed him of it." Everyone was quiet. Some customers looked away. A few murmured apologies under their breath. Burke nodded at the manager. "Starting today, this man eats here free, every time." "Yes, sir," the manager said without hesitation. "And while we're at it," Burke continued, pulling out his phone, "let's make sure he never eats alone again." Within 30 minutes, they began to arrive. One by one, 4 more men walked through the doors of Sunnybrook Café, each wearing worn-out military caps and medals that had seen better days. Some leaned on canes. One was in a wheelchair, but all carried the same quiet strength. They made their way straight to Harold's booth and gathered around him like sentries returning to guard their own. One of them, a burly man with a thick, white beard, slapped a hand on Harold's shoulder and grinned. "You dragged me out of a minefield in Fallujah, remember? I think I owe you a few breakfasts." Another chimed in. "You stitched my arm up with fishing line and duct tape when medics couldn't get to us. Now let me pick up the check." A family at the next table whispered among themselves. The daughter, wide-eyed, asked, "Mom, are they real heroes?" Her mother didn't hesitate. "They're the kind that don't ask for the title, but earn it anyway." The waitress stood frozen by the coffee machine, gripping the pot so tightly. Her knuckles turned white. Her earlier smirk was gone. She looked at Harold, then at the growing crowd of veterans forming a quiet circle around him. Her voice was low, trembling. "Sir, I didn't know. I didn't mean—" Harold looked up gently. "You didn't ask," he said, not unkindly. Her eyes welled up as she nodded slowly. "Can I pay for your meals for the month? Please?" He shook his head. "Kindness isn't something you can buy. Just carry it forward." Lieutenant Colonel Burke and Harold remained in that corner booth long after the lunch crowd cleared out. They talked like no years had passed between them, just 2 soldiers catching up on the lives they built after the battlefields. The air in the diner felt different now, lighter, warmer. The staff moved more carefully, more respectfully. The manager quietly instructed his team to start drafting a new policy. Veterans eat free, no questions asked. By nightfall, local news. Outlets had picked up the story. "Veterans shamed for paying in coins, then everything changed," read the headlines. Photos of Harold and the other veterans surrounded by flags and camaraderie began to circulate online. The next day, the community responded. People stopped by just to say thank you. Veterans from nearby towns visited the diner to shake Harold's hand. Some left American flag pins on the counter as silent tributes. One night, a dozen former service members walked into the diner together. They didn't order food. They came just to sit with Harold to show him he wasn't forgotten. The booth by the window was now unofficially his. It had a small sign taped above it. Reserved for Sergeant Granger. As days turned into weeks, the transformations continued. The young waitress who had mocked him took a leave of absence and enrolled in nursing school, focusing on veteran care. She returned to the diner part-time, always stopping by Harold's table to check on him first. She never charged him again. Instead, she brought coffee before he could ask, and always made sure his food was warm. The manager installed a plaque on the wall by the register. It read, "To those who paid in more than money, we see you." The diner's slogan, once fresh, food fast, now included a new line underneath. Open hearts, no one forgotten. Harold's Saturday routine remained sacred, but soon he added Wednesdays to his visits, not for breakfast, but for something else. He called it coffee and company. Veterans from every background, some just back from deployment, Others from conflicts decades old would show up to talk, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. The corner booth became something more than a seat. It was a symbol, a space where old uniforms still held meaning, where a scar on a forearm or a medal tucked in a wallet didn't need to be explained. It was a place to be heard without judgment. Lieutenant Colonel Burke became a regular too. Using his military connections, he helped vets who needed paperwork expedited, housing assistance, or transportation to VA appointments. What started as a breakfast meetup grew into something the community called the Granger Circle, a network of veterans and volunteers providing support in the smallest but most meaningful ways. Even the coffee tin at Harold's apartment took on new purpose. It no longer held coins for breakfast. Instead, it became the seed money for the Small Change Big Respect project. The program funded gas cards for medical trips, phone minutes for soldiers calling home, and socks for homeless vets during winter, all from coins once seen as a nuisance. Reporters continued reaching out, but Harold always said the same thing. This isn't about me. It's about dignity. It's about the fact that anyone could be one hard break away from counting nickels to eat. One morning, a young man walked into the cafe and sat across from Harold. He looked nervous, clutching a photo. "My dad said you were the reason he made it back. He talked about you like a guardian angel." Harold looked at the photo. Two dusty soldiers leaned against a Humvee, grinning despite the sandstorm. His throat tightened. "We all needed each other out there," he replied softly. "I'm just glad I could be there when it counted." That day, the waitress refilled his coffee without being asked. She added a folded note on the side of his plate. "Thank you for teaching me what real strength looks like." Harold smiled quietly and tucked it into his wallet, right next to the photo of his unit. The staff now trained new employees to look for signs, a small pin on a jacket, an old military cap, a posture that spoke of discipline. They learned that respect doesn't wait to be earned again. It remembers what was already given. Over time, the diner's regulars changed. Families started bringing their children just to meet Harold. He never asked for attention, but he gave it freely. When someone needed help understanding VA paperwork, he'd make a call. When a young vet didn't know how to transition into civilian life, Harold sat with them for hours. And every week, as he left the diner, Harold would touch the U plaque by the register with 2 fingers like a salute. Not for himself, but for everyone who never got to come home. For those whose coins were never counted because they gave everything. 1 week later, just before opening hours, the diner owner screwed a small bronze plaque onto the wall above Harold's usual booth. It read simply, "This seat belongs to those who served." Underneath was a smaller inscription, "Dedicated to Sergeant Harold Granger and all who gave more than they had." That morning, Harold walked in like always, slow, steady, his olive green cap tilted just right. But this time, when he stepped through the door, the entire staff paused what they were doing. The manager gave a small nod. The waitress, the same. One who had once dismissed him, greeted him with a fresh cup of coffee before he sat down. "Thank you for coming back," she said, her voice softer than usual. Harold didn't need much. A warm cup, a clean table, a little peace. But what he received that morning was more than any meal could offer. The room had changed. So had the people in it. Where once there was laughter at his expense, there was now quiet respect. He took his seat beneath the plaque, folded his hands, and bowed his head for a moment, not in prayer but in memory. Memory of friends long gone, of silent sacrifices, of nights spent in bunkers waiting for dawn, of voices over radios, of uniforms folded neatly in trunks no one opened anymore. That Saturday, more veterans stopped by than usual. Word had spread. Some came from towns over an hour away. A few brought old photos to share. Others just nodded at Harold and took a seat nearby. The staff added extra coffee pots to meet the demand. The waitress, now familiar with the veterans' preferences, moved through the tables like she'd been serving them her whole life. She joked with them, thanked them, listened when they spoke. And when a new young recruit, barely 20, walked in wearing his fatigues and looking lost, she was the first to greet him with, "We saved you a spot. Right over there with Sergeant Granger." Harold welcomed him with a nod, pulled out the chair next to him. "You're not alone, son, not in this place." That night, after the crowd cleared out and the booths were wiped clean, the manager handed Harold a folded envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn thank you card from a local elementary school class. The kids had heard about the coin story, and every one of them had written a line. Some messages were simple. "Thank you for your service." Others were more profound. One child had drawn a picture of Harold holding a coffee mug with the words, "Heroes don't wear capes. They wear old jackets." Harold smiled and quietly tucked the card into his coat pocket. As months passed, the ripple effects continued. The small change, big respect initiative that started in a tin can had now expanded into a full community fund. Local businesses contributed. A nearby pharmacy offered discounted prescriptions for veterans. A mechanic down the road pledged free oil changes for vets every month. Lieutenant Colonel Burke visited more often too. He began organizing small gatherings at the dinner for National Guard units and reservists, especially those struggling with reintegration. Harold didn't speak much during those meetings, but his presence alone carried weight. A nod from him meant more than a speech. The diner's back wall became a memory board. Veterans were invited to post photos, patches, and small notes about their service. A string of small flags ran above it, one for each branch of the military. Harold's photo, him in his youth, helmet askew, half smiling in the middle of a sandstorm, sat right at the center. One rainy afternoon, a woman walked into the diner holding her father's ashes in a small wooden box. She said he had always talked about Sergeant Granger and wanted to visit the booth just once. Harold invited her to sit across from him. They shared coffee and stories. Before she left, she touched the plaque above the booth and whispered, "He made it home. Because of you." Harold never asked for a statue or recognition, but slowly he became a quiet symbol of what dignity really looks like. Not in medals or applause, but in showing up, week after week, paying with what you have, and never expecting more than a warm meal and respect. Years passed. The diner stayed open, still serving the Saturday morning special. The staff came and went, but the policies stayed. No veteran ever pays. Every guest gets a refill without asking, and above the cash register, the same words remain. We honor those who paid in more than money. Eventually, Harold visited less frequently. Age catches up to even the toughest, but his legacy never faded. His booth remained reserved. Veterans still came. Kids still asked about the man with the coffee tin. And every so often, someone new would walk through the door and ask, "Is this the place?" And someone would point to the plaque, smile gently and say, "Yes, this is the place."